If you're applying for U.S. citizenship, or you're even thinking about applying, this is for you. And I want you to stay with me all the way through, because what I'm about to share is not generic motivation or the same recycled advice you see everywhere. This is practical interview room advice. What officers actually focus on, what applicants usually mess up, what creates delays, and what you can do to make your N400 interview feel calm, organized, and predictable. For a lot of people, the naturalization interview feels terrifying. Not because they're hiding something, not because they're bad applicants, but because the stakes feel huge. Citizenship is emotional. It's the end of a long journey. It's stability. It's relief. It's a lifelong dream for many families. And when something matters this much, even simple questions can feel stressful. You start thinking, what if I forget a date? What if I misunderstand a question? What if I bring the wrong document? What if the officer doesn't like me? Those thoughts are normal. But the good news is that the interview is a process, and processes can be prepared for. Now, quick disclaimer before we go deeper. I'm not your lawyer. This is not legal advice, and every case is different. If you have arrests, court issues, long trips outside the U.S., serious tax problems, or anything complicated at all, you should talk to a qualified immigration attorney before you file or before you interview. What I'm giving you here is general educational guidance and a preparation framework you can use to get yourself organized. With that said, let's make this simple. Most successful citizenship interviews come down to three things: preparation, consistency, and credibility. Preparation means you know your own case better than anyone, and you're not scrambling. Consistency means your answers match your paperwork, and your paperwork matches reality. Credibility means the officer believes you're honest, you're not hiding anything, and you understand what you're signing and saying. A lot of applicants think the interview is mainly about the civics test, like it's a school exam. The civics portion matters, yes, and we'll cover it. But the deeper truth is this: the officer is evaluating your entire eligibility. They're looking at your identity, your residence history, your travel history, your marital history, your tax compliance, your criminal history, and your overall truthfulness. They're trying to see whether your file makes sense as one clean story. When a file is clean and organized, the interview often feels easy. When a file is messy, the interview can feel unpredictable, even if the applicant is a good person who deserves to pass. So the first mindset shift I want you to make is this: stop treating the N400 like just paperwork. Treat it like your life story, written down in a government format. The N400 is long. It asks about where you lived, where you worked, where you traveled, who you're married to, and whether you've ever had legal problems. Every question exists because USCIS is checking for legal eligibility and for credibility. When you sign the form, you are certifying that the information is true. Then at the interview, the officer uses the form like a script. They are not guessing. They're not improvising. They're going line by line and verifying what you claimed. That means if you don't understand what your own form says, you can accidentally contradict it without realizing. One of the biggest mistakes people make is letting someone else fill out the N400 and then they just sign it. Maybe they used a preparer. Maybe a relative helped. Maybe someone translated and guessed. Then at the interview, the officer asks, "When did you move to this address?" Or, "How many times did you travel outside the U.S.?" And the applicant answers from memory, but the form has a different answer. Now it looks like the applicant is lying, even if the truth is they simply didn't understand what was submitted. That's why you should always read your own N400 before the interview, line by line, like you're the officer. If English is difficult, get help translating it accurately, but do not skip the step of understanding what's on your form. Your goal is not to memorize the form like a robot. Your goal is to recognize every answer and be able to explain it. A powerful way to do this is to make your own case timeline in plain English. Write down your key dates in one place. When you became a permanent resident, every address and the move-in and move-out dates, every employer and the start and end dates, every trip outside the U.S. with the departure and return dates, and major life events like marriage, divorce, name changes, and children's birth dates. When you have that timeline, the N400 stops feeling like random questions. It becomes structured, and you can verify your form against your own timeline. Now let's talk about residence and travel, because this is one of the most common areas where good applicants get delayed. People hear the phrase continuous residence and they misunderstand it. They think it means, I lived in the U.S. for 5 years, I have a home here, so I'm fine. But USCIS looks at residence in a specific way, and travel can complicate things. For most applicants, you need 5 years of continuous residence as a lawful permanent resident. For some applicants married to and living with a U.S. citizen, it's 3 years. Continuous residence does not mean you can never travel. It means you did not abandon your residence, and you did not trigger certain rules that break that residence. A trip outside the U.S. that is more than 6 months can raise questions. A trip that is 1 year or more can be much more serious. The interview is where these questions come alive, because the officer may ask, why were you gone that long? Where were you living? Were you working there? Did you keep your job in the U.S.? Did you keep your home here? Who was paying your bills? Where was your family? The officer is trying to see where your real life was during that period. Even if you never had a long trip, USCIS officers are still very focused on travel, because travel affects other eligibility rules too. Physical presence is different from continuous residence. Physical presence is the total number of days you were inside the United States during the statutory period. Some people don't realize they can meet the 5 years as a resident requirement, but fail the physical presence requirement if they traveled a lot. That's why your travel list must be accurate, not estimated. Guessing is dangerous. A small error can become a big credibility problem if the officer spots that your dates don't make sense. So what should you do? You should prepare your travel history like you're preparing evidence for a serious appointment, because that's exactly what it is. Use your passports, old passports, entry stamps, airline emails, and any travel records you have. If you have online flight histories, use them. If you've taken many trips, consider building a simple spreadsheet for yourself and then verifying it against your N400. You want to walk into the interview knowing, yes, my trips are correct, my dates are correct, and if the officer asks me about a specific trip, I can explain it. If you had a trip that was close to 6 months, it's smart to bring proof that you kept strong ties to the U.S. during that time. Think in common sense terms. If you truly lived in the U.S. and the trip was temporary, your life should still look U.S.-based. That could be proof you kept your job, proof you kept paying rent or mortgage, proof your family stayed here, proof you kept your bank accounts active, proof you were enrolled in school, or anything else that shows you didn't move your life abroad. You're not trying to overwhelm the officer with papers. You're trying to make it easy for them to say, okay, this makes sense. Now let's talk about taxes, because taxes often become the hidden trap in the interview. A lot of applicants do not look at their taxes until the officer asks. That is the worst time to discover an issue. In the interview, you want to feel steady, not surprised. USCIS can ask whether you filed taxes for every year in the statutory period. They can ask whether you owe the IRS money. They can ask whether you ever claimed to be a non-resident for tax purposes. They can ask whether you support dependents properly. And if there are inconsistencies, it can raise good moral character concerns. Here's the truth. Owing taxes is not automatically a denial. Plenty of people owe taxes and still naturalize. The problem is when the story looks irresponsible or dishonest. If you owe money and you ignored it, ignored notices, never tried to fix it, and you're applying for citizenship, an officer may see that as a negative factor. On the other hand, if you owe money but you have an active IRS payment plan and you've been making payments, that usually looks responsible. The key is not perfection. The key is credibility and good faith effort. Before your interview, you should request your IRS tax transcripts so you know exactly what the government records show. This helps you avoid surprises. It also helps you confirm that the years you think you filed are actually filed. Sometimes people believe their preparer filed, but there's a missing year. Sometimes people moved and didn't receive mail. Sometimes there was an identity issue. The interview is not the time to discover that. If there is a gap, address it before you interview. If you owe money, set up a plan before you interview if possible. You want to be able to tell the officer, calmly and truthfully, "Yes, I owed money, but I took care of it, and here is my payment plan confirmation," or "Here is proof it's resolved." That kind of calm documentation often prevents delays. Also, be extremely careful about consistency between your immigration story and your tax story. If your N-400 says you lived in the US, but your tax filing suggests something else, you may get extra questioning. This is why it matters to use competent tax help and to understand what your tax returns say, at least at a high level. You don't need to be a CPA. But you do need to know whether you filed as married or single, and whether there are any unusual positions that could confuse an officer. Now, we need to talk about the topic that creates the most denials: criminal history and honesty. Let me be very direct. Many applications fail, not because the person committed a serious crime, but because the person hid something, and USCIS discovered it through background checks. The N-400 asks a lot of questions that people misunderstand. It's not just, "Have you been convicted?" It asks about arrests, charges, citations, and court involvement, even if the case was dismissed. Many people think, "It was dismissed, so it doesn't count," or "It was years ago," or "It was just a small issue." But USCIS is not only looking at the event, they are looking at your truthfulness. If you had any arrest, any court case, any DUI, any domestic incident, any probation, any plea deal, any situation where police were involved, or any citation that required court, you should talk to an immigration attorney before you file or before you interview. And if you already filed, you should still talk to an attorney before the interview. You want to disclose properly and bring certified court dispositions. A disposition is the final outcome from the court. Officers often want official, certified copies, not screenshots or vague letters. If you show up without the right documents, your case can be continued, which means delayed. Honesty also matters in smaller ways. If you don't remember a date, it's better to say you don't remember than to guess. Guessing can create contradictions. If you don't understand a question, ask the officer to repeat or rephrase it. Officers are used to that. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign you're taking the process seriously. The worst thing you can do is pretend you understand, answer incorrectly, and create confusion. Now, if your green card was marriage-based, you should prepare for deeper questions about your relationship and household life. This does not mean USCIS is accusing you. It means the officer's job is to confirm the story makes sense. They may ask how you met, when you got married, where you live, who pays which bills, whether you have children, whether you share finances, and whether you filed taxes jointly. These questions can feel personal, but they're common. The officer is looking for a simple, believable picture of a real marriage. If you are still married and living together, bring strong joint evidence that matches your life. Joint tax transcripts or returns are powerful. Joint lease or mortgage documents help. Joint insurance is helpful. Joint bank accounts can help if you actually use them. Photos can help, but photos alone usually aren't as strong as financial and household documents. Also, be consistent. If you say you live together, your addresses should match across documents. If you say you share responsibilities, your documents should not tell a completely opposite story. If you are divorced, don't panic. Divorce is not an automatic denial. Many divorced applicants naturalize successfully, but if the divorce happened soon after you got your green card, or if the relationship history looks confusing, the officer may ask more questions. Your job is to answer calmly, without anger, without oversharing, and without contradictions. Stick to facts. If there was a difficult story, an attorney can help you present it safely and clearly. Now let's switch to the civics test, because this is the part people focus on the most. The civics test is absolutely passable, but you have to prepare in a smart way. The common mistake is studying in a way that only works at home. People memorize answers silently, or they watch videos and think, "Yeah, I know that." Then they get into the interview room, they feel pressure, and their mind goes blank. That happens to many good applicants. To fix that, you should practice out loud. You want your mouth to be trained, not just your eyes. Have someone ask you questions randomly. Practice in the same format as the interview. Quick questions, quick answers, no long pauses. Also, try to understand the meaning behind the answers. You don't need to be a history professor, but if you understand what the words mean, you'll feel less afraid. Memorization without understanding is fragile under stress. Understanding makes your memory stronger. Also, remember that the civics part is not the only test happening. The entire interview is an English-speaking interaction. Even if the civics questions are easy for you, you still need to understand the officer's instructions, and you need to answer clearly. That brings us to the English portion. The English test is usually not complicated, but it's underestimated. The officer is evaluating your ability to communicate in everyday English. This includes speaking, reading, and writing, unless you qualify for an exception. If you can only answer with yes and no, or if you appear to be repeating memorized lines without understanding, you can run into trouble. The solution is daily practice. You don't need perfect grammar, you need functional English. Practice talking about your life in English. Where you work, what you do, where you live, who lives with you, and your basic travel history. Practice reading simple sentences. Practice writing simple sentences. Do small practice sessions consistently, because consistency beats cramming. If you qualify for an English exemption based on age and years as a permanent resident, follow the rules carefully and bring an interpreter if allowed for your situation. Even then, it helps to understand basic English phrases used in the interview setting, because the environment is still English heavy. The more comfortable you feel, the calmer you will be. Now let's talk about documents, because this is a practical way to reduce stress immediately. The interview notice tells you what to bring. Bring exactly what it says, in original form when required. But also bring additional documents that match your case. Think of it like this. The officer's questions are often triggered by your file. If something in your file suggests a topic, like marriage-based eligibility, name changes, prior arrests, long trips, selective service registration, child support, taxes, or prior immigration filings, the officer may ask for proof. If you have it with you, your case can move smoothly. If you don't, you might get delayed. Organize your documents in a way that makes sense to someone who has never met you. Don't bring a messy bag of random papers. Use folders. Separate identity documents, residence documents, marriage documents, tax documents, travel documents, and any court documents. Put things in date order. When the officer asks, you should be able to hand over what they want in seconds, not minutes. This does two things. It saves time, and it signals credibility. You look like a person who takes the law seriously. Now let's talk about interview day behavior. This sounds simple, but it matters. Officers are people. They notice your attitude and your composure. Dress professionally. You don't need to wear a luxury suit, but look respectful, clean, neat, and serious. Arrive early. Be polite to everyone, including security and staff. Speak clearly. Don't rush. If you feel nervous, Slow down your breathing and slow down your speech. When you rush, you make mistakes. When you slow down, you sound confident. If you don't understand a question, ask the officer to repeat it or rephrase it. That is completely normal. If you don't remember something, say you don't remember. Don't invent. Don't guess. Don't try to sound smart. USCIS is not looking for a performance. They are looking for truthful answers that match your file. Also, never argue with the officer. Even if you feel a question is unfair, arguing usually makes things worse. If the officer is confused, calmly clarify. If the officer asks for a document you don't have, say so honestly and ask what they would like you to provide. Staying calm is not just good manners, it's strategy. Calm people make fewer errors, and calm people appear more credible. Now we reach the most overlooked issue, and this one is responsible for many unnecessary delays. What happens after you file the N-400 and before the interview? Many applicants think, I filed, now I just wait. But USCIS expects your information to stay accurate. If something major changes, you often need to update USCIS properly. The problem is that processing can take many months, and life happens during those months. If you move, update your address properly through the correct process. If you travel, track the trips carefully. If you get married, divorced, separated, or your spouse passes away, that matters. If you get arrested or charged with anything, that matters. If you have major financial events like bankruptcy or serious tax issues, that can matter depending on the case. The key theme is proactive honesty. If you show up to the interview and the officer learns that something major changed and you never updated USCIS, it can look like you were hiding it, even if you weren't. And once credibility is damaged, everything becomes harder. So you should live by a simple rule. From the moment you file the N-400 until the day you take the oath, treat your case like an active application that must remain accurate. Keep copies of what you submit. Keep a folder of updates. If something big happens, address it the right way instead of hoping it won't come up. Let's also talk about practice, because practice is what turns fear into calm. You should do a mock interview, not just civics questions. A full mock interview. Have someone sit across from you and ask you basic questions like an officer would. Your name, your date of birth, your address, how long you lived there, your job, your employer, whether you traveled, whether you're married, whether you have children, and the yes-no questions about your history. Practice answering without over-explaining. Practice speaking clearly and confidently. Practice pausing before you answer so you don't blurt out the wrong thing. A very common interview mistake is over-talking. People get nervous and start adding extra details that create confusion. For example, the officer asks, "Have you ever been arrested?" The applicant says, "No." "Well, there was this one time, but it wasn't really an arrest, and the police just talked to me, and my friend was driving, and..." Now the officer is paying attention in a different way. If the answer is yes, say yes and be ready with documents. If the answer is no, say no. If you're unsure, say you're not sure and explain carefully. But don't ramble. Clarity is power. It's also important to manage your expectations. Some interviews are fast. Some are slow. Some officers are friendly. Some are very serious. Do not take the officer's personality personally. Your job is to be steady. Smile if it feels natural. Be respectful. Be consistent. The officer may ask the same question in 2 different ways to check consistency. That is normal. Don't get offended. Just answer truthfully. And remember, your goal is not to be perfect. Your goal is to be eligible and credible. People pass every day who have accents, who get nervous, who forget a date and correct it, who need a moment to think, who had minor tax balances and set up a payment plan, who had complicated lives but prepared properly. Passing is not about being flawless. Passing is about being prepared enough that your case makes sense. When you approach your N400 interview with this mindset, preparation, consistency, credibility, you remove most of the fear. The interview becomes a conversation about facts you already know, supported by documents you already organized. So here's how I would summarize what you should do starting today, in plain English. Review your N400 until every answer looks familiar and truthful. Build a clean timeline of your addresses, jobs, and trips. Make sure your travel history is accurate. Request your tax transcripts so you know what USCIS can see. Fix missing tax years if there are any. If you owe taxes, set up a plan and show responsibility. If you have any criminal record, do not guess. Get legal advice and bring certified dispositions. If your case is marriage-based, bring strong joint evidence and know your relationship timeline. Practice civics out loud and practice English daily. Organize your interview documents so you can hand them over fast. On interview day, be calm, respectful, and honest. And after filing, keep your information updated and don't hide life changes. If you do these things, you will walk into your interview with a completely different feeling. Instead of fear, you'll feel structure. Instead of confusion, you'll feel clarity. Instead of, I hope I pass, you'll feel like, I'm ready. If this video helped you, please like and subscribe, because I keep posting updates and practical guidance for people going through immigration processes. And share this with anyone you know who is applying for citizenship, because many denials and delays happen for reasons that are totally avoidable with the right preparation. Stay informed, stay prepared, and I'll see you in the next video.